Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Today we're looking at the Dell Alienware AW2725D, one of the more affordable 1440p QD-OLED monitors to hit the market in 2025. Dell are pricing this model at just $550 US, which makes it one of the cheapest OLEDs you can get, plus it's using a slightly revised panel that bumps the refresh rate up to 280Hz. Not the biggest difference, but it's a little better than previous 240Hz models.
Today's video is brought to you by Insta360 and their Link 2 and Link 2C 4K webcams. Both models feature a high-performance half-inch sensor delivering crisp 4K video with an AI-powered audio algorithm that provides pretty great sound quality via the built-in microphone. Building on the original Link, the Link 2 series includes AI tracking for individuals and groups, auto-framing and gesture controls, which are pretty neat. Check it out. It also now offers modes such as customizable backgrounds, bokeh, even like a natural blur, so it really adds versatility to every use case. The Link 2, which is the one we're using right now, is equipped with a gimbal, which is perfect for dynamic use cases like teaching or demos, while the Link 2C omits the gimbal, which leans more into the conference call space. With various AI features, both new and improved, on offer here, and a very user-friendly desktop app experience, achieving the perfect presentation for you really couldn't be much simpler. So if you'd like to get your hands on one of these new Insta360 Link 2 series cameras, check out the links in the description for a special Amazon Prime Day offer.
The panel technology being used here is the same as previous 27-inch 1440p, 240Hz and 360Hz QD-OLED panels from Samsung Display. No real changes to the subpixel layout, screen coding or brightness spec. The 280Hz format seems to just be a new revision of this panel to better compete with lower cost WOLED panels, which are also shortly jumping up to 280Hz at relatively affordable price points. So for the most part, I'm expecting the same QD-OLED experience as we've tested previously. The AW2725D uses a very similar design to other 2025 Alienware monitors. This is Dell's AW30 industrial design in reference to the brand's 30th anniversary. It's a rounded, sleek, minimalist aesthetic that I think looks great. It's well built, the quality of materials used is very good with a nice finish to the plastic panels, and this gives the monitor a premium look that exceeds what we usually get on gaming displays. One thing that may catch buyers off guard is the AW30 design is not black, it instead uses a deep blue color which Dell call Interstellar Indigo. I mention this because on Dell's website their product images for the AW2725D look blacker and more neutral than the monitor does in real life. I think the deep blue color looks great in person though, it's certainly more interesting than the normal boring monitor black. From the front, this monitor looks fantastic, and part of this is the small squarish stand base and sleek pillar. This base is not only compact, allowing a wide variety of keyboard positions, but also relatively flat so you can still put stuff on top of it, maximizing desk space. It's a sturdy stand that supports height, tilt, swivel, and pivot adjustment with a reasonable maximum height. The port selection is standard, one DisplayPort 1.4 with DSC, two HDMI 2.1 48GB per second ports, and a 2-port USB 5GB per second hub. One of the hub's ports is USB-C, but this is only for USB data and 15 watts of charging, not for display input. I like that these ports are easily accessible on the bottom edge of the monitor. 10-bit 280Hz is possible through both display inputs and over HDMI 2.1 without DSC. The OSD is controlled through a directional toggle along the bottom edge just below the Alienware logo. Inside is a good range of features including all the usual color controls, there's a timer and frame rate display, shadow boosting features, and Alien Vision which gives you access to crosshairs and other image manipulation modes. The only main criticism I'd have is that there are no OLED care options, implying that all the usual burn-in mitigation features are always enabled. That's a bit disappointing when brands like MSI offer quite a lot of user customization, so if a particular aspect is annoying you, you can risk burn-in by disabling or turning down one of the settings, or you could make the features more aggressive to try and extend the panel's lifespan. On the AW2725D, the only OLED care option is a manual run of the pixel refresher. Text clarity is the same as other 1440p QD-OLEDs as this panel uses Samsung's revised triangle RGB subpixel layout. Compared to LCDs at the same size and resolution, QD-OLED isn't as strong for text rendering as it produces some pink-green fringing at the top and bottom of text. This may or may not be noticeable depending on how sensitive you are to artifacts. However, text clarity is superior to 240Hz WOLEDs which use an RWBG layout. WOLED text rendering did improve with newer 480Hz panels, but those are not in the same price class as this 280Hz QD-OLED. Overall, QD-OLED text rendering is perfectly fine for gaming and average to reasonable for occasional desktop use. This QD-OLED panel is glossy, which is a double-edged sword. The main benefit is increased sharpness and clarity compared to matte coatings, with no coating grain or light diffusion that can impact apparent contrast. The downsides are mirror-like reflections, which are well managed on this panel compared to some glossy finishes, and QD-OLED ambient light reflection. In brighter environments, when displaying black, QD-OLED panels can appear grey instead, as ambient light activates the quantum dot layer. This reduces black depth in well-lit rooms and hurts the black level advantage you get from an OLED, but the issue can be mitigated by ensuring your room is dimly lit with light sources behind the display. Whether QD-OLED glossy is the right choice for you is dependent on your personal preferences and usage conditions. OLED panels of all varieties are also susceptible to permanent burn-in. You won't get burn-in while playing games or watching videos, but the panel will burn in over time when displaying static content for long periods. This makes OLED less well suited for productivity uses, where you'll be looking at static desktop apps all day. And you can check out our ongoing OLED burn-in series to see how real-world productivity use affects burn-in. The occasional amount of static app usage is fine, so don't worry about doing a bit of web browsing between gaming sessions. I just wouldn't recommend OLED as a monitor for full-time work. Dell offer an industry-standard 3-year burn-in warranty. Response time performance is excellent on this QD-OLED monitor, as it is for other OLED displays that we've tested so far. OLED offers lightning-fast response times around the 0.3 millisecond mark at all refresh rates, and performance doesn't change at lower refreshes, one of the many benefits of OLED for variable refresh rate gamers. This results in a single overdrive mode experience, where you don't need to adjust settings depending on the refresh rate you're using. There is effectively no difference in response time performance between this QD-OLED and other OLED monitors, including WOLED variants. OLEDs are much faster than even the fastest LCDs I've tested, and this is true whether we look at the best performance or average performance across the refresh rate range. Not only are OLEDs fast, they also have no overshoot artifacts, which can be an issue with some LCD models. When viewing cumulative deviation results, we can see that OLEDs get much closer to ideal response time behavior, and in most cases offer performance an order of magnitude better in this metric than LCDs. In practice, this leads to around a 1.5 times clarity advantage at a given refresh rate, so 280Hz QD-OLEDs offer a similar experience to 420Hz LCDs. Aside from comparisons to LCDs, the main thing you need to be aware of when buying an OLED for motion is that clarity on these panels is directly tied to refresh rate. At the same refresh rate, two different OLED monitors will look basically the same, so the actual refresh rate you'll be using is more important than the maximum refresh rate of the monitor. If you compare two OLEDs, one with a 240Hz max refresh and one with a 280Hz max refresh, but both are playing games at 120 FPS with a 120Hz refresh rate, they will look the same and give the same experience. Where higher refresh rate OLEDs become of benefit is when you use the highest refresh rate capabilities. When comparing a 280Hz OLED to a 240Hz OLED though, which are both in the same price range, there's not a huge difference when gaming at the maximum refresh. 280Hz is slightly clearer, but with just a 17% increase in refresh rate, it's not a game changer, and I think most people will struggle to notice the difference. I don't think you should pay much of a premium to access 280Hz over 240Hz. What's nice though is 280Hz does get a little closer to 360Hz, which is the next price tier up. 360Hz is still a 29% higher refresh rate and does look clearer in fast-paced games when the highest refresh is utilized, but that's a smaller gap than the 50% jump from 240Hz to 360Hz. This makes it a little harder to justify buying a more expensive 360Hz monitor, as now you'll have to be gaming above 280 FPS to benefit, so I think this refresh rate is in a nice sweet spot given the price. Input latency is excellent, offering a sub 1 millisecond processing delay in both the SDR and HDR modes. Combined with fast response times and a decent refresh rate, this OLED feels very snappy to use. The only way to achieve better latency is through a higher refresh rate model, for example 360Hz or one of the latest 500Hz options. Power consumption is pretty typical for a QD-OLED, consuming 62 watts for a full white image at 200 nits, which is similar to the MSI 271QPX-E2. For mostly white content, WOLED has an advantage due to its dedicated white subpixel. However, in a typical gaming session, more of a mixed APL scenario, the gap between QD-OLED and WOLED shrinks. I found all of 240Hz QD-OLED, 240Hz WOLED, and 280Hz QD-OLED to use roughly the same amount of power in this test, about 30 watts. This is a little more than an LCD of the same size, but less than higher refresh rate OLEDs. All QD-OLEDs that we've tested so far offer a similar color space. In the case of the AW2725D, we're looking at 99.3% DCI-P3 coverage, as well as 98% Adobe RGB coverage. In total, I saw 80.6% coverage of the wider Rec 2020, which is a good result for a QD-OLED monitor, and across gaming monitors in general. Out of the box, the AW2725D offers a pretty similar experience to Dell's previous 360Hz model from 2024, the AW2725DF. Adherence to 2.2 gamma is good, and the color temperature was only slightly warm by default, leading to a reasonable Delta E ITP average of 6.07. However, like with a lot of gaming monitors, the SDR mode does not use an sRGB or Rec 709 gamut clamp by default, so a lot of content will be oversaturated as it gets expanded up to fill the very wide gamut of this monitor. Some people like this effect, although it's not especially accurate and can cause issues with skin tones in YouTube videos, for example. Compared to other monitors, the AW2725D sits somewhere in the middle, and again very similar to the previous DF model. A couple of the other OLEDs I've tested have slightly better performance, but not by much. One of the ways to get a more accurate experience in the SDR mode is to use Windows 11's Auto Color Management feature. The AW2725D works well in this configuration, reducing saturation and color checker delta E's below 5.0 on average. It also maintains 99% coverage of sRGB and keeps every setting in the OSD available if you want to adjust white balance for further improvements. This is probably the best way to use the monitor. Dell also provide an sRGB mode, which is decent for other inputs that don't offer color management. Grayscale performance is good despite the wonkiness of the gamma curve, though not as good as the AW2725DF, while saturation and color checker results fall just short of what I consider as factory calibrated, which is an average Delta E ITP below 5. Despite this, it's still a very usable mode. Compared to other monitors, we again see the AW2725D sitting in the middle of the chart. The sRGB mode is not as well calibrated as the elite performance the DF model offered, but it's still pretty good compared to the OLED pack and general monitor market. Color checker performance is on the weaker side, but it's far from disastrous. A full calibration can improve performance further, and we use CalMan for that. This panel is well suited to multiple color spaces, including DCI-P3 when fully calibrated. Peak HDR brightness is the same as other 240 to 360Hz OLEDs at around 250 nits. This new 280Hz panel has not received the brightness boost we are seeing from 500Hz QD-OLEDs, which reach 300 nits. A little disappointing, but not surprising. Dell do not use an automatic brightness limiter in the SDR mode, so brightness is a consistent 250 nits in all situations. This level of brightness should be fine for most people, though of course it's not as strong as LCDs for those who use their monitor in a bright room. Minimum brightness of 21 nits is excellent for use in darker rooms. I was very impressed with the viewing angles of this panel. They are very wide, which makes it easy to view the display even at quite extreme angles. It really looks excellent. Uniformity was also very good with my unit nice and uniform, viewing full white, and no dirty screen effect viewing dark greys. This is keeping QD-OLED in the leadership position for display uniformity among OLEDs. The AW2725D is well suited to HDR from a hardware perspective. OLED panels, including QD-OLED, directly emit light and have individual pixel control, which makes them ideal for displaying HDR content. This feature allows each pixel to independently vary from fully switching off to displaying bright highlights, giving us deep zero-level blacks and per-pixel local dimming. The level of control OLEDs provide minimizes blooming in high contrast scenarios and allows for clean distinction between bright and dark areas that are close together. Compared to LCDs with a multi-zone backlight, OLEDs have far fewer ugly illumination artifacts, which are most noticeable when displaying difficult scenarios like star fields or subtitles, and there are no zone transitions as bright objects move around the display. With per-pixel control as its main advantage, OLEDs are best at displaying high contrast scenes with rich shadow detail, which is a key aspect to a good HDR presentation. Darker content interspersed with dazzling bright highlights brings out the best in OLED displays, as does HDR content with fast motion. For gamers especially, input latency on most OLEDs is low in the HDR mode. The weakness to the HDR presentation on an OLED is overall brightness. While peak brightness can be high in the best cases, full screen brightness is low, and this limits the punch in bright daytime scenes. LCDs may not have per-pixel control, but zone backlights can simply get significantly brighter in bright scenes. Depending on what you want out of an HDR monitor, your preference could swing more towards LCDs or more towards OLEDs, but typically speaking, OLEDs are a great choice that deliver a fantastic HDR presentation. Dell offer a range of different HDR configurations, but the two of most interest are the Display HDR True Black mode and the HDR Peak 1000 mode. These operate in the same way as other QD-OLED displays with similar modes. There are several other options like desktop and game HDR, but these perform almost identically to the true black mode. What also affects roll-off is the console mode and specifically the settings source tone mapping. With this enabled, EOTF tracking is more accurate. With it disabled, roll-off is more gentle. This setting is grayed out when using the monitor with the PC, producing behavior that's identical to having the console mode enabled with source tone mapping on. Of the main modes, the true black mode is the most accurate. EOTF tracking in this configuration is good in all conditions, so you get the correct level of brightness in both dark and bright scenes for the most part. I saw a small amount of panel dimming in the mystery test pattern, but not in other tests, and this level of dimming is not as significant as the usual amount we complain about. Peak brightness is capped at just 450 nits, so in darker scenes with bright elements, you don't get as much punch, and some objects lack detail in bright areas. The Peak 1000 mode removes the brightness cap, and peak brightness now hits 1000 nits in darker scenes, so there's a lot more punch in elements like fires and lights. EOTF tracking accuracy is strong for darker, lower APL scenes, but in brighter scenes this mode has panel dimming, which drops brightness across the entire screen despite the panel otherwise being capable of this level of brightness. This affects EOTF tracking and is not accurate. This issue with panel dimming in the Peak 1000 mode is also found on other QD-OLED gaming monitors, so it's not unique to this Alienware. We're still in a position where you can't achieve the highest peak brightness in darker scenes without bizarrely dimming brighter scenes. For the best experience, you'll need to change HDR modes depending on whether you are playing mostly brighter or mostly darker content. Alternatively, you can set and forget the mode you're most interested in optimizing for. HDR brightness is identical to other QD-OLED monitors with the exception of the new 500Hz models. Here you can see the monitors along with their listed configurations, which are usually the brightest modes on offer. There's no major difference between the two main HDR modes until we get to 2% window brightness, where the Peak 1000 mode is capable of just over 1000 nits compared to 475 nits for the true black mode. Both of these results are the same as other QD-OLEDs. In real scene brightness, there isn't much to talk about either. We're once again getting basically the same performance as other QD-OLED monitors, which is largely a strength. There can be a bit of variance between models in the individual tests, but on the whole, we're getting a very standard QD-OLED experience here. The Peak 1000 mode delivers higher peak brightness in the lower APL tests. The true black mode delivers higher brightness in the higher APL tests. In HDR calibration, the AW2725D is one of the better monitors for dark scene calibration thanks to its very good EOTF tracking in both modes. In bright scene calibration, the AW2725D is poor in the Peak 1000 mode due to panel dimming along with other QD-OLEDs, but the true black mode is decent. Color match performance is strong, indicating accurate colors across both modes. Then we get to color volume, which shows similar results to other QD-OLEDs and stronger performance than WOLEDs. Final section of this review is the Hub Essentials checklist. Dell do a good job of advertising this monitor, only coming up on the border of offering factory calibration and also the usual stuff with response times. The name of the product is mediocre in my opinion. It's not the worst jumble of letters and numbers I've come across, but it has a high potential for confusion. Dell have a lot of other monitors with very similar names, such as the AW2725DF, which is the 360Hz model, the AW2725Q, the 4K 240Hz model, and the G2725D, which is an entirely different IPS LCD. I think it's especially confusing when most other brands use Q to mean QHD or 1440p, whereas Dell use Q to mean 4K. The AW2725Q is not 1440p, but the AW2725D is. Anyway, in the feature support matrix, Dell score pretty well with a lot of features supported. The only things to be aware of that I haven't mentioned so far are the lack of black frame insertion support of any kind, the potential for OLED flicker like other QD-OLEDs, the lack of Dolby Vision support. Some other Alienware OLEDs include this, but not this model, and the fact there is a fan inside the display which isn't audible in normal operation. The Dell Alienware AW2725D is another great QD-OLED gaming monitor, this time coming in at a quite affordable price point for an OLED. There's no real surprises here with how the AW2725D performs, which is a good thing because it means we're getting the same established QD-OLED performance we've found to be excellent in other displays. The great thing about these new 1440p QD-OLED panels is almost nothing is being sacrificed compared to last year's higher tier models. In 2024, we saw the debut of the 1440p 360Hz QD-OLED panel this monitor panel is based off. Dell used it in the AW2725DF, which had an MSRP of $900 US. In 2025, the only major change is the refresh rate getting cut to 280Hz, while the price has plummeted to just $550 US. This makes the AW2725D one of the best bang for buck monitors on the market right now. We're getting the exact same elite response times as higher tier 1440p OLEDs, combined with a fast 280Hz refresh rate. Clarity isn't as good as 360Hz options when gaming at those top-end refresh rates, but if you're more of a mid-refresh rate gamer, having access to 360Hz is pointless. 280Hz is more than enough for single-player titles in particular, and the experience at 100 to 200 FPS will be identical to more expensive 360Hz alternatives. As a bonus, it has slightly more headroom than 240Hz models. The HDR presentation this monitor offers is pretty much identical to other QD-OLEDs we've tested. We're getting all the usual strengths and weaknesses. Per pixel control allows for amazing contrast and deep blacks, while peak brightness is pretty decent. It's a well-calibrated monitor in both the SDR and HDR modes for the most part, and this panel has excellent color volume. The only major weakness is the continued presence of panel dimming when using the brightest HDR mode, something we see across the vast majority of QD-OLED monitors. I think the design of the AW2725D elevates it into the premium tier of gaming monitors, even if the dark blue finish may not be for everyone. Outside of this, there's no major standout features here because performance is ultimately quite similar to other 1440p QD-OLEDs of a similar refresh rate. Dell haven't gone above and beyond with the port selection, there's no Dolby Vision support, no super unique OSD features, and the control over OLED care options is quite limited compared to, say, MSI alternatives. But I don't think the lack of standout features matters all that much when Dell are targeting great panel performance at a great price. $550 US is an amazing deal for what is on offer here. It puts the AW2725D among the cheapest 1440p OLEDs on the market. It's cheaper than MSI and Gigabyte's 240Hz alternatives while offering a slightly higher refresh rate. It's also cheaper than some of the WOLEDs we've recommended, like the Asus XG27 AQD-MG. I think this is a great entry point to OLED gaming that will be hard to beat if that price is maintained. You should still be on the lookout for other models though, because there's a lot of price competition in this segment. If you see a similar QD-OLED for a similar or lower price, it could be a better option given how similar most QD-OLEDs are in performance. For example, right now, Dell are offering the higher end AW2725DF for just $600 US on sale, which is a better product with its 360Hz refresh rate. That's a less than 10% premium to get a higher refresh rate, which seems quite reasonable to me. But if you just want one of the most affordable OLED gaming monitors on the market, I can definitely recommend the AW2725D. So anyway, that's it for this review. If you appreciate the independent testing and analysis that we do right here on Monitors Unboxed, please consider supporting us via our Patreon page. Links are in the description below. If you sign up, you get access to some pretty cool benefits. The Discord chat is a great place to talk about monitors, get some recommendations. We offer the OSD settings and ICC profiles for all the displays that we've tested on the channel, so that's a nice Patreon perk for people. Also, if you have found this review useful and you are going to ultimately buy one of the monitors that we talked about in this video, we have links in the description below for that, so check those out. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.